All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. We're excited to have you here again this morning. For those online, I know we had a slight technical difficulty this morning, but we're so happy that you're back with us. If you have any challenges online, please, of course, you know Mishaela is there at the ready for you to be able to help you. So really, I wanted to just open up a little bit this morning and talk about what we have been doing at HPA. Of course, we shout it loud and proud on our social sites and our website. But I just really wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit, because really our mission is to improve the lives of those impacted by hypopara. Now, that could be a patient, that could be caregivers, that could be your friends and family. So we want to be able to educate and advocate for you and help you do that as well. So we've had a really big year. We've done a lot of things. One of our biggest projects this year was the website. And I don't know how many of you have been on there. I know we use our social sites a lot, but our website has this wealth of information. Somebody had asked me, like, how do you know about clinical trials? How do you know about this? We have it all listed out for you. So spend some time. We update that regularly. Spend some time getting on there and learning about all the different things that we have. And of course, all of this is sponsored through our pharmas, through donations. So we're going to be working really hard to see how we can continue those efforts to continue the work that we do. We've increased our online presence across the board with physicians, with patients, and we will continue that outreach, because we know that we've only touched this many people so far, and we need to touch this many people because we all know how this affects us. So we're going to continue those efforts as well. So again, the website has been our major thing. Mishaela and I have gone out and we've done conferences at Endo. We went to ASBMR recently. We had Deb, who went out to Global Genes this year. So we're really trying to expand our where we are, and we set up these wonderful little booths as we go. So we talk to so many physicians to be able to really educate them. It's really interesting as we share with them as patients ourselves the different things, and a lot of them just, you know, maybe it's just take a Tums or something. And of course we're like, yes, we do that. And then we try to educate them a little bit more. But again, it's a rare disease, so we can't expect every physician to know every single thing about a rare disease. So that is our continued mission, is to be able to get out there and spread the news to as many people as we can. Now, we are all patient board, and that's a fabulous thing, because we're passionate about it, because it's our care, it's your care. But again, it could also be we're patients, and we know how hypopara is, and sometimes it's, you know, we work full time and we're doing this as well. So we do need additional help with committee members. We're looking for a board member that can really help us in the Treasury department. So we need somebody that can help take over that part, because as much as she does every single thing in this organization, Michelle, she's a jack of all trades. She takes over whatever we can't get done. So, but we want to get her really focused on her advocacy part. So we do need somebody from a Treasury perspective. We also need somebody on the back end for that has some IT experience that can help us. We've built this amazing website through the pharma's help in building that, but now we need somebody who can help manage that on the back end. So as you're thinking about how you can be the change, we're certainly looking for volunteers, and we would love to talk to you about that. So there's that. And then we've done some really great work this year with RareX with Deb. As you saw, we had the booth out there, and she said we've got some great patients and information. So it's really great to continue to learn. So please, again, this is all on our website, so you can go out there and take a look at what we have there. I participated in a podcast that I'm really excited to come out. I think Dr. Shobak was there, and we had another patient. So that should be coming out, I think, at the beginning of the year, or beginning of the new year. It should be, it's a 3-series podcast that talks about hypopara from a patient perspective and from a doctor perspective. Our biggest news that we have going on, and you've heard us talk about it a little bit, is we were able to actually get granted the PFDD with the FDA. Michelle has done an amazing job at being an advocate for that, going through the process, learning everything that she could learn to be able to go, how do we do this? And she is in major preparations, which I'm going to have her talk a little bit about. But I definitely want to give her kudos for the work that she's done this year. Michelle. All right, so I think that's probably it for me for this morning. I'm going to have Michelle talk to you a little bit later today about the PFDD, a little bit more about the website, and then as we go through the day, if you see us on breaks and you have experience, whether it's with, IT, helping to be a treasurer, whatever that is, please reach out to us and let us know, because we are always welcome to have you on our team. So without further ado, I'm really excited about our next presenter. Dr. Mishaela Rubin is the Assistant Professor of Clinical Medicine at Columbia University. She has been a huge supporter of our HPO community for years, and we thank you for all your work, Dr. Rubin.
Good morning, everybody, and it's such a pleasure and so meaningful to be here today and to see many old and dear faces and to meet many new faces as well. So I'm going to talk today with a focus on cognitive function in hypoparathyroidism. These are my disclosures. So I don't need to tell everyone here what hypoparathyroidism is, that it involves low calcium, high phosphate in the blood, and high calcium in the urine in the setting of PTH being absent. And I think we also all know here that it's a very rare disease known as an orphan disease, most commonly caused by an operation done in the front of the neck, but that there are other important genetic and rare causes like autosomal dominant hypocalcemia, which we heard about yesterday, or autoimmune polyendocrine syndrome, which can also happen, as well as other causes. And I think we also know that parathyroid hormone works through three main systems in order to keep calcium and phosphate levels normal. It works at the bone, it works at the kidney, and it works at the intestine. And the overall net effect is to raise calcium levels in the blood, lower phosphate levels in the blood, and keep urine calcium levels down. And our goals in taking care of a patient with hypoparathyroidism, as we know, is to keep the corrected serum calcium in the low normal range. Corrected means when it's adjusted for the amount of albumin or protein in the blood, because it's the part that's not attached to albumin, that free calcium that is active in terms of biological effects. We don't want patients to have symptoms of low calcium. We don't want people to have a high urine calcium. For a woman, that generally means the calcium should be under 250 milligrams over the day, and for a man, under 300 milligrams. We don't want phosphate levels to be high. We think that can set the stage for calcification developing in tissues where it shouldn't be. We want magnesium levels to be normal, because people with hypoparathyroidism sometimes struggle with it, and it can exacerbate a low calcium level. And we want vitamin D, meaning so-called regular, or what we call parent vitamin D, to be in the normal range as we would want for any patient. And this is the conventional management, which everyone here is familiar with, but we use calcium, could be carbonate or citrate. We use calcitriol, which is the activated vitamin D. Always important to know that that has a short half-life. So if you're taking 2 pills, not to take it all at once, but to split it up. We want people to take regular parent vitamin D to have good vitamin D levels, magnesium if needed. Some people are helped by taking a water pill known as a thiazide that can help to block calcium that's lost in the urine and raise calcium that's in the blood. Sometimes we advocate for PTH treatment, and these are the indications based on the guidelines that we heard about yesterday that were published last year. So we would think about recommending PTH treatment if somebody's having symptoms of their low calcium, if somebody's phosphate in their blood is high, if they're having some evidence of kidney damage, if their urine calcium is too high, if their quality of life is poor, which we're going to talk about more in a minute, or if they're not able to absorb calcium and vitamin D from their intestine, then PTH treatment could be very helpful for that person. So I'm focusing now on quality of life because that relates to what I want to really zone in on in this talk. And there are many studies now in hypoparathyroid people that have used questionnaires to assess how the patients feel about their quality of life. And a lot of studies have used general questionnaires, and that means a questionnaire that is very well known but used in other diseases, not only in hypoparathyroidism. And probably the best known questionnaire is something called the Short Form Health Survey, or SF-36. So this has been used with many other conditions, and it has questions that are like, have you felt full of pep? Has your work been affected by your physical or mental health? Are you feeling down? Are you feeling like you're able to accomplish what you want to? And the answers to these questions have been shown to really correlate well with actual quality of life. But this questionnaire isn't targeted specifically for the type of hypoparathyroid symptoms that we know that people with hypoparathyroidism experience. So we now have special questionnaires for hypoparathyroidism that can better capture the very relevant symptoms. And I'll group these into physical, emotional, and cognitive symptoms, and then delve into cognitive a little bit more. So the physical symptoms that I think everybody in the audience knows better than I can describe, but these can include muscle cramps, spasms, and twitching, tingling, pain, being sensitive to heat, feeling very fatigued. Sometimes people also say that they have a rapid heartbeat. And there are other symptoms here that I haven't included as well. But certainly these physical symptoms can be very dramatically debilitating, like a patient who told me she had to get her son to the doctor and had to pull over and not be able to take him because she felt that a calcium crash was coming on. Or, you know, I have a patient who's a conductor and he literally couldn't lift his arms to conduct, or not being able to pick up your children. So again, you know better than me how hard these physical symptoms can be. We're also able, with our disease-specific for hypoparathyroidism questionnaires, to capture emotional symptoms. And depression is a clear-cut part of having hypoparathyroidism. So this can mean feeling sad or blue or low energy. And the biggest study, we called it a systematic review that puts together all of the data on complications of hypoparathyroidism, that was published last year along with the guidelines, showed that looking at almost 19,000 people, that depression was present in 9% of hypoparathyroid people and was one of the most common complications. So I think there's no question that that's part of the disease. And people with hypoparathyroidism, almost all seem to have some degree of anxiety. Among other sources, it was documented in a survey done by the Hypoparathyroidism Association, the Voices of Hypopara, and people gave different reasons for having anxiety, and one was just worrying about the future. Will I be able to take care of myself, my family, continuing to work? What about the long-term consequences like tissue calcification or kidney damage? And I think most disturbingly of all, a lot of patients feel anxious because their doctors might not understand what they're going through, and many times are told nothing is wrong and everything is okay, and I think that could really trigger a lot of anxiety in someone. And I'm going to turn now to the focus of the rest of the talk, which is cognitive symptoms. So I'm not going to do it, but I think if I asked everyone to raise their hands if they've experienced brain fog at some point or another, it would be kind of ubiquitous here in the room. And this is things like somebody saying, I can't remember somebody's name that they just told me 2 seconds ago. I can't remember my last thought. And many patients will say to me, you know, I'm wondering, am I getting early Alzheimer's? Is this normal aging? Is this how it should be? And people will describe that they can't remember like they used to, or concentrate, or find the right word, or understand information, or think clearly, or kind of feel like they're functioning with a veil over their mind. So this is something that people with hypoparathyroidism really describe feeling, and these questionnaires, both that are specific for hypopara and that are general for all diseases, clearly show that people with hypoparathyroidism undoubtedly suffer from this. So one important obvious question is, does being on PTH help people feel that these cognitive symptoms are being alleviated? And we do have some data. In the main NatPara study that led to it being approved back in 2015, that used that general questionnaire, the SF-36, it did show that the people who were on NatPara did have an improvement in how they perceived their cognitive symptoms were, especially in those who started out with the worst cognitive symptoms to begin with, while the people who were on placebo did not report that they felt they had an improvement in their cognitive symptoms. Disappointingly, the change in the NatPara group as compared to the change in the placebo group did not reach what we call statistical significance, which meant that it still fell within the margin of error, and this probably happened for a bunch of different reasons, but nevertheless, within the NatPara group itself, it was shown that feeling that cognitive symptoms were improved was detectable. We have more recent information to tell us about how people feel their cognitive symptoms are while on PTH, and this is data with TransCon. And it showed that being on TransCon, PTH, as opposed to being on placebo, using both that general questionnaire, the SF-36, and a disease-specific hypopara questionnaire called the Hypoparathyroidism Patient Experience Scale, that patients had improvement in multiple areas of quality of life, not just cognitive. So they felt that their physical symptoms improved, like less cramping, twitching, that cognitive symptoms improved, like being able to think and concentrate better, physical functioning, so being able to do more strenuous tasks, and daily life, being able to function better at work or school or go on a trip. So this is certainly very reassuring and compelling data that people feel that their quality of life improves when they're on parathyroid hormone. But what's really lacking in the literature is very little information using objective, standard, quantifiable measures of people's cognitive function. So I think we know very well how people experience it, but we also want to be able to say which specific cognitive domains are affected and which can we actually see in a rigorous scientific formal method are being affected by hypoparathyroidism, and can these specific cognitive domains be improved with parathyroid hormone treatment. So there are a lot of cognitive domains, and this, I'm going to show you some. It's not an exhaustive list, and some of them are overlapping, but I'll try to explain them to you. So one cognitive domain, one category reflects how much knowledge have you accumulated, and this very much relates to somebody's education and culture. But for example, this would include what is somebody's vocabulary. So if someone were to say a word to you, could you identify quickly the right picture that goes with it? What is someone's level of reading? So if someone gives you a word to pronounce, can you read it well? So these reflect the accumulated knowledge that someone's gathered over their life. It's also called crystallized cognition. But then there's the other category, which is the ability to acquire and act on new information. So kind of how quickly can you think in different ways on the spot. Those are called fluid cognition. So one of that would be executive function. So that would be how well you're able to multitask, how well you're able to plan things, kind of your cognitive flexibility, how you can take in new information and recalibrate based on that. Another is finding words, which we know people with hypoparathyroidism often complain of. That's called semantic fluency, but that would be if someone said to you, okay, in 1 minute, name all the animals you can think of. So how quickly you're able to pull those words out. Another is attention. So that means how well you're able to focus on one central thing and not be distracted by different stimuli to the side of you. So basically paying attention. Another cognitive area is processing speed. So that's how quickly you can take in and react to new information. So if someone showed you two pictures and said, tell me as fast as you can, are these identical or are they different? So how fast are you able to take that in information and give the feedback? Another is visual spatial functioning. So that's seeing the relationship between shapes. What this might mean in practicality is looking at a map and being able to figure out easily how to use it. And then there's a whole bunches of category of memory. So one is episodic memory, and that's how well you're able to remember things in the right order. So kind of remembering episodes. So if I said to you, could you tell me in order what you ate last night for dinner, or what was the order of things you did last week in your trip in Paris? So that would be remembering episodes. A different category of memory is working memory, which means how well you're able to remember things and work with it. So that would be if I told you, okay, here's a list of 5 animals. Please tell them all back to me, but in the order of biggest to smallest. So in other words, how well you can remember something and work with it. There's also visual memory. So that would be, let's say you drove by a street on a sign on the road, how well you're able to remember what that sign said. Auditory memory, how well you're able to remember multi-step instructions that are told to you. So again, some of them are overlapping and there are other ones that I didn't mention here, but just to give you an idea of how we could kind of view cognition, in quantifiable, discrete domains. And there's very little studies in hypoparathyroidism looking at cognitive function this way. There's one study in patients with non-surgical hypoparathyroidism, and they actually found that a third had cognitive dysfunction. And they used some tests that showed that there was reduced inhibitory control or a feeling of lack of self-control, impairments in visual spatial functioning, which again would be like looking at a map and figuring it out. They also found some data on motor or movement compromise. And then there's a study in post-surgical hypoparathyroid patients where actually using some of these tests, they didn't find a difference from people without hypoparathyroidism, but what they did see was that people with hypoparathyroidism who had lower calcium levels had worse visuospatial attention. That actually means being able to focus on a specific location. Executive function, again, being able to multitask, plan, and be flexible in your cognition. And semantic memory, which means your long-term accumulated general knowledge. Like if I said to you, what's the capital of Cuba? So this study found that if you had a low calcium, you were more likely to have trouble in those areas. So I'm going to briefly show you some of the new data that we found in our study at Columbia. We call our study SHINE, which stands for the Study of Hypoparathyroidism and Its Natural Evolution. And it really is a natural history study where we're inviting people who have hypoparathyroidism to come and be followed over a few years to be able to learn about the long-term complications of the disease. So I'm going to talk about the cognitive issues, but we're really also looking at kidney function, kidney calcification, vascular function, cardiac function, bone complications, motor function, genetic predictors of developing increased calcification down the line. And at the end, I'll talk a little bit more briefly about that study. But in terms of just the cognitive functioning, what we're doing is a whole bunch of cognitive tests. I'm actually only going to show some of that data here because we haven't analyzed all of it yet, but we've been trained and we work together with a neuropsychologist at Columbia, and the data that I'm going to show you are in 50 participants so far. The mean age is 51, the average age. The participants include 39 women, 10 men, and 1 transmasculine patient. The demographics are 47 of the patients are white, 2 are Asian, and 1 is Black. The mean duration of hypoparathyroidism is 17 years. 36 of our participants are post-surgical patients, 14 are non-surgical, 23 are on conventional management, which means calcium and calcitriol, and 27 are on PTH, and this is all different forms of PTH. So this is just to show you kind of what the tests look like. Again, there are other cognitive tests, but for the data I'm going to show you. So one category that's called the crystallized score reflects this accumulated knowledge. And so here we will ask the patient, what's this word? And the patient has to figure out the right picture, so that tests their vocabulary. And then we give a series of words for the patient to read. Some are easy and some are hard, to see how they're able to pronounce it. And so those together comprise this crystallized, or basically accumulated verbal knowledge score. And then the fluid is, again, how quickly you can take in new information and act on it. So for executive function, we'll ask people as fast as they can to match up an object based on either being the same shape or the same color. And it's switched up. So that shows how cognitively flexible someone is. For attention, we'll have one arrow in the middle pointing one way, and then the two side arrows pointing either the same or different directions. And people need to pick out the correct direction of the arrow without being distracted, so that shows attention. Episodic memory, how well you can remember things in order. We give a whole list of activities that somebody does, and then ask the patients to take the activities and order them again the same way they were initially ordered. Working memory, how well you can remember things you're told. We'll give a list of animals and then say, please say all the animals back to me, but going from largest to smallest. And then processing speed, we'll show two pictures and say, tell me as fast as you can. Are they the same or are they different? And we see how quickly people are able to do that correctly. And very importantly, when we get the scores on this, we have to compare each person to somebody who's like them, who doesn't have hypoparathyroidism. So somebody's age, gender, race, ethnicity, and very importantly, their level of educational attainment is going to influence how they score on these tests. So all of the scores that we get are adjusted based on a very big normal reference range to be able to take these factors into account. So I'm going to start with showing you, and again, this is just our preliminary analysis, the crystallized cognition, which again is the accumulated store of verbal knowledge, which comprises reading, vocabulary, and then composite, which is just putting those two, reading and vocabulary, together. So a score of 50 is considered normal in the US population. And you could see in people who are not on parathyroid hormone therapy, who are on conventional measurement, that the scores are actually okay for the reading and vocabulary, and then putting them together. And then when we compare them to the people who are on parathyroid hormone, they're really also okay. The bars might look slightly different, but they were not different enough to reach any statistical difference. So we would say from this preliminary analysis that the accumulated store of verbal knowledge, which really reflects people's education, seems to be intact in people with hypoparathyroidism. On the other hand, when we looked at fluid cognition, the results were a little bit different. So again, the 50 line shows what is expected to be average in the United States. So we could see executive function, or again, cognitive flexibility, being able to multitask and plan and pivot, was lower than the average population in somebody with hypoparathyroidism. Attention, being able to not be distracted, was also lower. Working memory, so that's remembering things and being able to put them in a new order, was a little bit decreased. Episodic memory, maybe barely decreased. That's remembering things like what you ate for dinner last night. Processing speed, maybe a little bit decreased. Again, that's how quickly you can say, is something the same or different, or just the speed with which you can process new information. And taking all of these fluid aspects together, the composite score was lower than the average in the population. And then when we compared these scores to the people in our study who were on parathyroid hormone, we could see that their executive function actually was significantly higher. We also saw that their attention was significantly higher, although not quite reaching, the average US cutoff of 50. Working memory, it looks a little higher, but this was not statistically different. Similarly, the episodic memory really was not different at all. The processing speed being on PTH did improve significantly. And when we take the composite of all these scores of people who are on parathyroid hormone, you could see that the composite of this form of cognition, called fluid cognition, was significantly higher in people who are on parathyroid hormone therapy. So again, this is preliminary, and we have other cognitive data, but it does seem to suggest that in very quantifiable ways, there are certain specific areas of cognition that are compromised in hypoparathyroidism and can be reversed with parathyroid hormone therapy. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes kind of thinking about why do we get cognitive symptoms in hypoparathyroidism and why might PTH help. So the first most obvious thing is, of course, when the calcium is low, we know that the nerve cells become triggered much more easily. The medical term is depolarization. But they have a much lower threshold to get excited, and sometimes they'll even get excited spontaneously because they're so highly sensitive without there being a trigger. So maybe the same way this happens in the muscles where we feel the muscle cramps, it's also happening in the brain. Certainly a seizure is an example in the brain of hyperexcitable neurons, but perhaps this altered neuron sensitivity relates to cognitive function in the brain as well. And this is just to make a comment about how important a calcium sensor would be to prevent cognitive as well as physical symptoms, because if somebody could know their real-time calcium level at home, of course, that could ward off cognitive and physical symptoms in a calcium crash and prevent this disconnect where you go to the lab, get a calcium that's just like one random snapshot in time, but it's not, of course, capturing the fluctuations during the day. And I know we're going to hear today a whole talk about having an at-home calcium sensor. Another theory why people might get cognitive symptoms is maybe there's calcium building up in the brain. It is known that calcium can accumulate in the brain, especially in people who have non-surgical hypoparathyroidism. It's known to accumulate particularly in a spot of the brain called the basal ganglia, which relates to movement, like that's an area that might be affected in Parkinson's disease. It's not known to relate to cognition. But in our SHINE study at Columbia, we are finding that there's calcification in other areas of the brain as well. And we don't know, but one of the things we're questioning is whether calcification in the brain can relate to some of the measures of cognitive dysfunction that we're finding. It's also important to kind of think for a minute, why can cognitive function be so different in people with hypoparathyroidism? I know I have patients who are really fine and able to be in sports and have high professional success, but then of course there are people who are utterly debilitated by their cognitive symptoms. Different thoughts about it. It might just be some demographic differences. Many of our studies include perimenopausal white women who are post-surgical. That is the majority of people with the disease, but I think having more diverse populations in our disease might shed some light on the variability of cognitive symptoms. I think education level might contribute. It makes sense if somebody's more health literate, they might be able to better mobilize support and resources to help their cognitive symptoms. And then maybe, I don't know, but if you've had the disease for longer, maybe you've been better able to develop coping strategies and maybe your regimen is more stable. I do know the first year of post-surgical hypoparathyroidism is typically the worst year in terms of cognitive symptoms. And then there might be things kind of separate, not directly related to parathyroid hormone. If somebody has hypothyroidism, we know they can have poor concentration and decreased memory, and I think Dr. Schobach is going to talk about how to tease that out today. But I think a lot of studies do show that over and above the hypothyroid symptoms, hypoparathyroid symptoms have an additional cognitive burden. If someone's depressed, that's a known thing that can impair cognitive function. Some medications can have cognitive effects. If someone is going through perimenopause, that's a well-known time of life where people can have forgetfulness, difficulties with word retrieval, and brain fog. So that might be something that's added to the mix. And then if someone has vascular risk factors, so if their cholesterol is high, which can happen with hypothyroidism, if they're not exercising enough because they're worried about hypocalcemia, or if they just have calcification building up in their vasculature, that could affect cognitive function too. And then maybe PTH itself, not calcium, is playing a role on cognition. We know that there's PTH in the fluid that bathes the brain called the cerebrospinal fluid, and we also know that there are receptors in the brain for PTH in areas in the brain that are related to cognitive function. So this totally needs to be tested. We really don't have any data about this, but it's kind of a speculation. And this is supported because we know in primary hyperparathyroidism, the opposite condition, when people have too much PTH, those patients also have cognitive symptoms. So it may very well be what we can say is a U-shaped curve, that people who have very low PTH levels, like in hypoparathyroidism, are going to have high cognitive symptoms. And people who have too much PTH levels are also going to have high cognitive symptoms. But really, cognitive symptoms are going to be the least likely to be present when PTH levels are at a normal range. And then kind of the last speculation is that maybe we need PTH to promote good blood flow to the brain. It's known that PTH has some effects to dilate blood vessels. It's not a very strong effect, but it is a reason where we might counsel people after taking a PTH shot. Could they feel a little bit lightheaded? Sometimes it might be a reason if someone gets some redness if they've done a PTH shot, because there could be some dilation of the blood vessels in that very spot. So again, another theory, but maybe having PTH in the brain is helping better blood flow from some slight increased dilation going on in the blood vessels there. So to manage cognitive symptoms, so this is for practical living life, it's so important to be aware of triggers and know the preceding symptoms. Many people will start to develop both cognitive and physical symptoms when they exercise. So some patients will take calcium right before, some patients will have their calcium with them right after. So that's a way you could prevent that from happening. I think almost any type of illness can trigger a spiral of hypocalcemia, so you should have a very low threshold if you're sick to be aware of that and consider taking extra calcium. It's well established that having your period leads to low calcium, and this is because estrogen lowers calcium levels. So many patients know that in advance and will take extra calcium at that time. And people have told me that hot weather can just set off their hypocalcemic symptoms. I'm not sure what the mechanism for that is, but that's something that I've heard. So I hope everyone here already knows this, but you should always have calcium and or calcitriol with you and be prepared. And then I'm just going to conclude with telling you just a tiny bit more about the SHINE Columbia Natural History Study. So we want to learn about the long-term complications, how they affect different organ systems in the body. So we do scanning to look for calcification. We look for new predictors in the blood and the urine that can predict the development of complications, tell us who's more likely to progress with their complications, and also to see, are people on parathyroid hormone able to have a halt or even a reversal in some of these complications over time. And it's one visit per year at Columbia. Multiple tests that we do with questionnaires, blood, imaging, cardiac exam, the cognitive that you heard about, motor tests, looking at bone, brain, kidney, blood vessels. That's kind of a brief summary. If you're 18 years or older, you're eligible. Any type of hypoparathyroidism, whether you're on conventional management with calcium and calcitriol, or really any type of PTH, you're eligible to come to participate. And if you're interested, this is my email, and this is the email of our research coordinator, Joanna. So I have to conclude by thanking our participants, many of whom are here today, but it really takes a great deal of generosity to give of yourself, to be in a study. Of course, hopefully it's helpful to the participant, but it's really helping other people in the hypoparathyroidism community to fill very big knowledge gaps that we have about this disease. So I'm so grateful for the givingness that everyone has to come and do research for this study and other studies that I've been involved in over the years. And I just want to acknowledge our funding for the SHINE study in particular from the FDA Office of Orphan Products. And with that, I'm going to conclude. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you, Dr. Rubin. All right. We have just a couple minutes for questions, if anybody has any questions. Here we go.
Hi, Dr. Rubin. Are you going to be looking at, when you kind of seem to have clumped the PTH all together, right? So, but there's a big difference between taking Forteo and either Natpara or Transcon. Are you going to be separating those out at any point?
Yeah, that's a great question because I do think cognitive symptoms can vary. It depends on our numbers, you know. Our goal is to enroll 94 patients, so right now we're at 54. So if we have enough numbers that it would be able to show valid statistical significance, then we would like to split it out, but yeah, if not, we'll have to keep it lumped.
As you know, I have non-surgical hypopara, and I think back in 2015, I was diagnosed actually with dementia related to the hypopara. My question is, do you know what the difference, say, between the dementia related to hypopara compared to other types? Would it look similar or different based on how well I do with the, with the calcium levels, or say if I end up going on a Transcon? Do you know, would that change? Would that look different compared to other types of dementia?
Yeah, that's such a smart question, and a lot of patients do ask me that and say, well, if I went on PTH, could I then tease out, how much has gotten better versus how much is because of something else? So I think we don't really know. I think these data are starting to show us that there might be a certain profile of cognitive symptoms that are particularly affected in people with hypoparathyroidism. So maybe if we knew what your symptoms were in particular, we could try to guess, is it likely to be due to the hypoparathyroidism and not something else? And of course, trying to address any other causes that you might have that could be addressable, like, low thyroid or, other imaging or blood tests that could help to try to figure that out. So I can't say for sure that we would be able to tell you, yes, this is definitely because of the hypopara. I think it's tricky, but maybe we'd be able to kind of have some educated guesses on putting a lot of the data together.
I don't think he said any other type, but I'm curious how it differed, just from the other types, like how that would look, because there's no information really, too much currently.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that we need more information, and I think that would be a goal, because a lot of people say that, like, is this the hypopara? Is it me getting old? So I think being able to know how much of it you could blame on the hypopara would be very helpful.
Okay, somebody, Bob? Oh, go ahead.
Have you considered looking at intersectionality of neurodivergence and hypopara with the cognitive functioning?
Explain to me more what you mean by that.
Well, so with neurodivergence, there's a lot of mental load with managing masking and living in a neurotypical world. So is that something, are you looking at those factors as well and considering that with your study?
I guess we haven't thought of it that way, but that would be a great idea. I do think some of the cognitive domains, like attention and executive function, might be more prominent in individuals who are neurodiverse. But I think that would be something great to focus on, because we certainly do have participants who struggle with some of those issues. So I think figuring out kind of the Venn diagram and how they overlap is important. So thank you for suggesting that.
Sure.
We have an online question that asks, does any alternative therapies help to promote the cognitive symptoms, or are there any brain exercises we can do?
That's a great question. Yeah, so in the neuropsychology world, there are different exercises that are thought to be used to promote memory, as well as tools that can help people fill in some of these deficits. So I do have a little bit information on that, if you would want to email me, as I've looked into it a little bit. And then I think also, a little bit of a tangent, but modifying anything else that could indirectly affect cognitive function, like we think maybe optimizing your cholesterol in case that's contributing to vascular cognitive dysfunction, could be helpful as well. But yes, there are strategies, in the neuropsychology world for cognitive promoting exercises.
There's another question that asks for some clarification on when you talked about estrogen helping with calcium levels, because they believe that they had heard in another presentation that it could actually lower your calcium level.
Yeah, I must have misspoken, because that questioner is correct. Estrogen lowers calcium levels by about 0.5. So I apologize. And that's why when women are menstruating, their calcium level can very well drop. So that's correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
My question was, when you guys are doing these cognitive function tests, are you checking people's calcium before they take the test? And are you guys checking their cognitive function during a calcium crash, like before, during, and after? And how does that compare?
Great question. So we do collect the calcium right before the cognitive test. So we haven't looked at it, but we should be able to analyze whether the actual calcium level is impacting certain parts of the cognitive function. We haven't been able to do it during a calcium crash, I guess because when people are coming to the visit, unless we were to elicit a crash, I don't know how we would be able to capture that. If someone has suggestions, because I think that would be, important and useful information.
All right, well, thank you, Dr. Rubin.